Comp 1, this is a short video on close reading. We would like you to learn how to close read and annotate for meaning so that as we look at expert writers who create scenes of description or beautiful characterization or setting, that you can recognize the particular tools that they use to craft their writing. So in this quick video, we're going to look at rhetorical analysis slides that you guys have access to that discuss syntax, diction, and figurative language. It's the Google Slides presentation that looks like this. In that slide, it has this particular section that tells you that the first thing you should do is examine the syntax and separate the sentences at the period or at the end punctuation. You're looking at how many long and short sentences there are and noticing the use of different punctuation to vary the structure in the writing. I ask you to examine syntax and decide what particular structure the author has used. We don't expect you to break that down for the entire piece, but you should be looking at least at a couple or at least one rich paragraph to determine the primary syntax that the author is using. A segregated syntax is going to be one in which it's a short and concise sentence, and in especially nonfiction pieces you'll find that it is often carries the main idea or becomes the topic sentence. The other structures are extremely important to look at because those are what inform you on how to change up your writing and make your sentence structure more accessible, more enjoyable for the reader. The second thing that you will do is examine the diction for the rhetorical purpose. We've already taught you that connotative diction builds mood, and that connotative diction means that you selected that word because of the meaning associated with it or the representation symbolism. And so diction is something that you would continue to look for in a piece as you are analyzing close reading. What are those word choices doing within the piece? How are they creating intensity? How are they creating the overall mood and feeling? The third thing we ask you to do is to look at the literary devices, the figurative language. You should be taking notes in the margins, and I'll show you a document here in a second that you'll be using as well. But you're looking for things that the author is doing to create and craft their style that is not simple sentence structure. It also is not telling, it is showing. Here is the highlighting strategy as you are reading that you should be following. We're going to add this to your module, but it tells you to create in the sentences to create a slash mark at the end of every sentence and to note meaningful punctuation choices in yellow. You should also highlight the first three important words of every sentence in yellow, including the verb. As you're going through the first paragraph or two paragraphs, you should be identifying the specific types of syntax that the author has used. You should also note any parallelism, repetition in the syntax. You'll see that in the form of anaphora, epistrophe, phrases that are repeated in parallel structure, and that you should box in purple. All the while you should be commenting marginally. In pink you should highlight or circle the meaningful diction, and in the margins you should mention how that diction is supplying overall characterization, setting, conflict, mood, what it's doing to impact the piece. The third thing you'll be looking for as you annotate is in blue and green. You're looking at the lyrical and cadent qualities of the piece, the alliteration, the assonance, and the consonants. And I just encourage you to strike through or box, make a line through with blue or green so that you hear those sounds. And you should be deciding on whether those have a positive or negative impact on that piece and how that impacts it for meaning. In green, you should highlight the evidence of rhetorical devices. These would be comparisons and contrasts through metaphor, simile, personification. You should be identifying larger comparisons and contrasts through allusions, analogy, and juxtapositions. And you should be labeling those devices and strategies. In the end, you should also be bracketing to the side take a chunk of text, 5 to 10 line blocks of text, and you should choose an appropriate tone word for that section, as well as any further notes that you need to summarize the information or the meaning of that passage. This is a very short selection. It's a student piece, and I shared it with you last week. But this is one that you could break down fairly easily. It's not terribly long, not terribly complex, but you can see the first thing you should do is examine the syntax. And in green, I've layered what should happen. So here it is with some annotations, and let's see if I can break this down for you a little bit. The first thing I did was separate the sentences at the end, as you can see. And then it asks you to highlight the first 3 words, including the verb in the sentence. And I went ahead and did a river flows through, furry lichen and moss cling, ancient trees climb, a single tree grows, it stands alone. And really what you're doing is examining the beginning of the sentences. Is there a change? Do you repeat the same thing every time you start a sentence? And this one has some variation. The next thing that we're asked to do in part 1 is to identify the different types of syntax. And this can get tricky, but I think if you look at that presentation slide and you look at the different types of syntax, you will identify the different structures. The first sentence, I would argue, is the segregated sentence. It's a simple sentence. It's long, but it's a simple sentence, and it holds the main idea of the rest of the passage. And a segregated sentence often does that. The second sentence, I would argue, is a cumulative sentence. It takes several independent clauses and combines them together. The last sentence in the first paragraph is a freight train sentence. A freight train takes an independent clause and then adds structures after that add detail, and I believe that's what is happening here. In the second paragraph, a single tree grows near the edge of the clear blue water, semicolon, full and plentiful, it sprouts a forest of leaves from its branches. I believe it is also a cumulative sentence. You have the removal of a coordinating conjunction in the use of the semicolon, and that is an interesting structure. If you see that happening in your pieces or other people's pieces, that's called ascendant syntax. You have removed coordinating conjunctions and replace them with the semicolon. The next sentence is convoluted. The beginning of the sentence is interrupted before it is finished, and that's a convoluted sentence. The next thing that our highlighting strategies tells us to do is to circle the connotative diction in pink. So let's go back. Our connotative diction that I have identified is flows, surrounded, vast. These are your adjectives and your powerful verb choices. Luscious, furry, cling stoically, sharp, flourish, moist, misty, ancient, scaling the structures, small, insignificant, mass of the eminence. As you're annotating your piece, you need to decide what the overall mood of the connotative diction, what mood is being implied, and what the feeling is from the piece. There's vitality in this, there's life, there's stubbornness, there's tenacity, and so one of those words would work really well here. The other thing that I have identified is the repetition in the syntax of and in the second paragraph, the repetition and parallel structure of it or its. In a piece where and is repeated quite often, and there are actually a couple more in here that I haven't highlighted, but when and is repeated frequently and intentionally, more than just a comma. It is polysyndeton text. It's a syntax called polysyndeton, and those are very common in writings that are evoking a message, a powerful warning, or something like that. And you should notice those when they're occurring. It's not just ands, they're any kind of coordinating conjunction that are repeated frequently in a piece. The other thing that I've gone through is the lyrical and cadent qualities, and you'll notice that the blue are all the S's that end up in this piece, and these were intentionally chosen. The sounds were intentionally chosen in this passage, and the S's have kind of an interesting addition to the feeling of the piece. There are hard C sounds with lichen and cling and stoically and rock and climb and scaling and structures. And then there are also sounds with M, moist, misty, and greens growing, and side by side that's really good parallel structure. The last thing to point out that you should be doing is underlining the rhetorical devices. And I did do these in gray, but your rhetorical devices add a lot of feeling and additional imagery to the piece. These happen to be, I believe these happen to be almost personification of the flora in the forest. They sound like human attributes, and I think that gives kind of an interesting feeling to this piece as well. The description of the tree in the second paragraph is very much a personification, almost like a human being standing watch. To finish this piece up, you would simply use the boxes, either on I tell kids on the left to marginally note just kind of a summative idea of what was happening, and then on the right to express the impact of these different rhetorical devices being used. Your paper can get pretty full of notes. At this point, this is highlighting. This isn't annotating. There must be notes in annotations. And so you'll want to make sure that you finish that process when you are going through it. Another powerful dominant impression of place is the one here. A dust-covered road meanders through arid and decaying hillsides, while thinly carved ruts scar the loose gravel. Sprouting through the barren trail, weeds grow only to be beaten down by the next traveler. 3 delicate wildflowers grow alongside the road, with backs hunched over from the toil of simply thriving. Erosion exposes auburn dirt, crumbling and fading into the road. A bulky gravestone acquires dust scattered by the passing wagon. Forgotten and left in the shadows, ruts and markers remain in the past. You would do the same thing. You would separate these at the sentences with red marks. You would underline the first three words in the sentence. A dust-covered. I would say a dust-covered road meanders. Sprouting through the barren trail. You see that you have different starters for the sentences. This particular sentence here, spouting through the barren trail, is called a periodic sentence. You've actually delayed the main idea with this dependent phrase. Okay, so this would be another really good one to look at as far as active word choice and very detailed description, and you could find meaning from the choices this author has created. So in your annotations for the excerpts we provided, these are the things that you need to be looking for in annotating in those short passages in your groups. We will come back and decide just how the author's craft and style has contributed to the overall meaning.